Okay, we are recording. I'm Brandon Polite, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Knox College, and I am joined by Michael Thomas Connolly, who is a musician, producer, engineer who's been in the business for 25 years. He's mixed over 1,200 tracks. And importantly, he's the owner of MTC Studios in Ferndale, Washington. And anyone who works in aesthetics may be familiar with the piece that he wrote for Aesthetics for Birds, basically on why vinyl records aren't magic. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
That's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Cool. So, what this is a part of a series I'm doing on Taylor Swift re-recording her albums and sort of thinking through the philosophical significance and implications of that project. And so you're an ideal person to talk to because you've recorded lots and lots of songs and lots of albums.
Mhm.
And so before we get to the topic of re-recording something, what are the steps involved in recording a track and going from stuff that's happening in the studio to the sounds that hit our ears either in our headphones or on our stereos? So could you walk us through that process?
Sure. So I think a lot of people, if you haven't done it before, I think you might have the impression that, and this is the way you see it in movies and stuff, that the band goes into a studio and somebody counts it off and then they give the performance of their life, and the recording engineer is just hoping that they can capture it, and they've captured the magic in the box and now it's done. And while that was basically the case in the early days of recording, so from the 1930s through the 60s, mid 60s, that doesn't really resemble reality for most albums that you've heard. It certainly doesn't for the Taylor Swift stuff or anything that would be modern pop music. So the modern process is more like movie making. So movie making is not filming a play. If you were to film a play, it would be kind of underwhelming as a movie. It would look kind of flat and one dimensional, and it would not be as exciting and larger than life as we expect out of movies now. And similarly, in a lot of ways, recording a band live in a room, it does not give the huge in your face pop sound that people associate with modern recordings. And so the way that they're actually done is it kind of starts with a pre-production process. So, and I'll describe the way that I do it with my clients, and it's pretty typical. So I might have a singer-songwriter come into the studio. I've done a lot of projects with a singer-songwriter who just plays, say, guitar or piano, and comes in and says, "Here are all my songs." And we look at, maybe they have 20 songs, and we try to figure out which 12 of these are the most varied, kind of show some range. There's not a lot of thematic repetition between them. Let's find 12 of these that feel really solid. So picking some songs and then looking at what instrumentation would work well for those songs. So assuming we want a fully fleshed out, not just a solo guitar sound, but if we want a big band sound on the record. So here's a song that is a sad ballad, and maybe it needs some haunting piano with a lot of reverb on it, and maybe it needs a sample of an old like baseball radio broadcast, and maybe it needs just a few things. And another song, it's like a big gospel number that wants drums and bass and piano and Hammond organ and a choir backing the vocals and stuff like that. And this is all imagined. And to prove out these ideas, we might make some demo recordings where we're just convincing ourselves that if we added these kinds of instruments playing these kinds of parts, then the feel would work. And I'd like to point out that if a movie maker is doing pre-production and they're reading a script and they're seeing, oh, there's a car chase, there's a big explosion, and in their mind they're imagining the hero is jumping out from the explosion in slow motion. They've kind of visualized it. And so I have to do the same thing if I'm producing a record. The songwriter is giving me the script basically. If they play the song on guitar and they're really wailing on the guitar, but what they're trying to tell me is that this is supposed to be a huge high energy moment, and I'm supposed to figure out, how do I translate? It's not that you really want to hear the wailing on the guitar, because that actually can sound kind of thin and crappy on a recording. I'm trying to bridge that. Oh, what instrumentation and what kind of arrangements could we put together to make it feel to listeners the way that it does in you, the songwriter's head. And conveying the feeling is, I would say, like one of the primary goals of this activity. Getting it to feel the way the artist feels it, because they're hearing something in their head that I'm not able to hear, and they're just using their guitar to show it to me. But I have to make it feel that way to everyone who listens to it. So by the end of pre-production, we have a good sense of what instruments we're going to have. And so maybe I'm calling people and finding players to come do this. And also, from a technical sense, what order will we record things in? So it's pretty rare that will all happen at once, because you would need a big studio. And these days we expect to be able to control all those instruments individually, which means they have to be in acoustically separate spaces from each other. So my studio has 3 rooms that I can put people. But if I want more than 3 sets of things that are completely isolated from each other, I can do that by doing them at different times. So the typical way this might go down is, in the case of a big gospel number, let's say that it's going to have acoustic guitar, electric guitar, drums, bass, horns, Hammond organ, the lead singer, and then a backing choir. There's a sensible order to do that, like building a house. So you might start with the rhythm section of the guitars, drums, and bass. If they all play together live, that you have a good chance of having a good solid feel, and it sounds like real people playing together. And then you might add the horns on top of that as what's called an overdub. So they just are listening to what's been recorded before in their headphones, and they play along to it. I like recording the lead singer as late as possible in this process, so that when they sing their final vocals, they hear everything that's happening to be inspired, and so that they're energetic. The energy of their performance matches the final track. And then usually the last thing would be harmony vocals, because they hear the lead singer and are supposed to follow along with the lead singer. So this gets put together in pieces, and at every step you keep asking this question about, what was the feeling the song was supposed to have, and are we heading in the right direction with it? If you said that this was supposed to be this incredibly poignant, vulnerable song, why is there that like huge saxophone solo in the middle? Like it doesn't fit. And so you can kind of keep bringing it back to, what was my mission here? And so now you've recorded all your parts, and what you likely have is not just one, but multiple performances of a lot of these. So the lead singer might take 3 or 10 or 20 attempts at singing that lead vocal. So you might have 20 copies of it. And someone who did an electric guitar solo usually wants a bunch of runs at that as well. And so you'll have all these electric guitar solos, you'll have multiple vocal performances, and now there's an editing step of sifting through that material and picking the takes at each moment that kind of sound the best. And again, when I say sound the best, I mean primarily serves the mood of the song. Just like in a movie, a movie has a dramatic arc, and there's a sad moment, there's a funny moment, and picking the best takes of an actor for a movie what is best at a given moment will be what serves the story arc. And songs have a story arc too. Sometimes it's Sometimes it's a single mood through the course of the song. Um, Sometimes there's real changes in mood, but these are how the decisions get made. If you're, you know, you're not trying to salvage garbage. If you have a lot of good takes to work with, then you're picking for the best mood and energy. And that could be down to syllable by syllable on a vocal. It's not, the large granular way to do it is verse 1 from this take and verse 2 from this take. But for a major label project, yeah, you could definitely be down to syllable by syllable, because I like the way that your breath catches on this one word, and I definitely want this. And so you end up with the Franken take of all these performances put together. And so hopefully what this is getting at is that there's not, and I tried to talk about this in the article for Aesthetics for Birds as well. There's not a fact of the matter about accuracy in the studio. We're not capturing reality. We're constructing something like a movie. It's not a documentary, it's a movie. And if you think about the way a movie gets shot, here's a dramatic scene between two people arguing. And well, if you look at the behind the scenes of how this movie was made, these two actors said their lines on different days, right? It's one conversation, but it's been stretched over days, and they stopped and they had lunch and they relit for the other close up on the person's face. It's a very unnatural process. And so when you have musicians in the studio and it's day 3 of working on a song that will end up at 2.5 minutes long, someone in my role as a producer has to remind them that, oh, be sure to play your part like you're very excited about this huge guitar solo that you're accompanying, that you can't hear yet because the guy was delayed by a week and hasn't done the solo yet. But be sure that your part sounds excited about that. So someone has to hold the vision of how all these pieces will be put together. Okay, so we recorded everything, we edited, we picked the best takes to make Franken takes that sound really good. Almost everything that you hear for the last 20 years has some amount of tuning of the vocals as well. There's the really over the top auto tune made famous by Cher, but there's much more subtle tuning of vocals that happens almost all the time, and we expect it now. We kind of don't tolerate anything that's the slightest bit out of tune, unless now it's more of a statement that you would not tune your vocals. I would put it like that. So some tuning of vocals, some sliding around of rhythm. So let's say you have a great performance from some drummer, and it's the primary criteria is that it had the energy and vibe that fit the song, and they just screwed up some of their fills. So those are going to get moved in time, so that it sounds more in time. Again, these days it's more of a statement if you're not doing that than if you are. So now you've tracked it, which is the recording process. You've edited it, and now you have a performance that is what you want. And now the final stage is mixing it. And when you mix a song, you take all these instruments and vocals and everything that got performed, and essentially imagine that you're arranging these on a stage, and the sound stage people talk about. So I can take these sounds and I can put my vocalist 2 feet in front of the listener, whispering in their face, or I can put that vocalist 20 feet away on a concert stage in what feels like a huge environment. I can essentially light that scene to put all the focus on the vocalist, or to light it more broadly and kind of diffuse the focus between this whole ensemble. So I think of mixing as a spatial process. Like I'm arranging these performers in some imagined space. And when I close my eyes and press play, especially in the first few seconds, you get this real flash of what kind of space it is. We know a lot about space from our ears. You know, we can tell when someone's calling us from the bathroom because we hear that echo of the bathroom. And so mixing is arranging those instruments and voices in space and choosing in the course of the song what to pay attention to. So, you know, that focus should change as theater lighting might change. So when it's time for the guitar solo, it's like we are guided to pay attention to that. And it's not, that takes some work. So it takes, you know, if you ever see, here's my mixing console. So if you saw me mixing a song, you'd see these faders moving up and down by themselves, and those would be movements that I programmed to draw attention to whatever it is I want you to pay attention to. And there's a lot of creativity in mixing that I think people don't really realize that. So an effective song or piece of music should guide the listener on a, sounds like such a cliche, guide the listener on a journey. But let me put it in less cliched terms. There's things I want you to pay attention to, just like a movie, a movie maker wants you to pay attention to something. They will put it on screen as a close-up, or they will play with lighting to make you look in one corner of this image. Sometimes a movie maker has a close-up of a face, but what they want you to see is the creepy person creeping up in the background. So there's intention behind those choices. And in mixing music, I might have 20 or 30 or 40 different parts that are all being mixed together, but I need to know what I want you to pay attention to at any moment. A lot of the times it's the lead vocal, but between vocal phrases, even 2 seconds of silence between vocal phrases, I want to give you something to look at. And so I might take that moment and boost the level of a little guitar part in the back or someone playing the tambourine or something. So I want to take you on a journey and never leave you confused about what it is you're supposed to be paying attention to. And so that is, in a nutshell, like that's the art of mixing. And something that's kind of interesting about it is that while the result of this process is copyrightable as a phonogram, it's called, or a sound recording, the techniques of mixing are not copyrightable. And so it's more of a trade secret. It's the hardest thing I've ever learned how to do. And it's everyone has kind of a unique workflow of how they do it. So a lot of people do this just in their computer. I use a combination of this old analog gear plus my computer to do it. There are analog purists who, back in the day, if you wanted a certain instrument to be louder at a certain part of the song, you had to perform that by pushing the faders up and down on a mixing console. And sometimes that would involve the whole band, like a handbell choir, where one band member was responsible for 3 or 4 faders and they all had worked it out. And it was its own performance in the sense that it would happen in real time and they had to push those faders up and down. And here's a pro tip. It's better to not give a band member control of their own instrument. You should give them someone else's instrument or they'll just push their own way, way up. That's how that works. So the result of this mixing process is that you have a mix. And if you've done all your steps right, what you have is a recording that you perceive as being in a certain physical space that makes sense for the feeling of the song, that presents, if it's a song with words, that presents the singer in a way that makes sense for the song. There's a difference in mood between Vulnerable Closet Confession and I Will Survive or something. Even you can see it on my body. It's like, does it present like this or like this? So the mix presents it like that. The instrumentation makes sense again for that mood. And the the journey of what I'm supposed to pay attention to also makes sense. So you might notice, say, take REM or something. The vocals are buried pretty deep in the song compared to Taylor Swift, or notably this new Adele album. The vocals are crazy out in front. Um, and I have to assume that those are intentional choices, and that what I'm being told there is this vocal is important and the thing you should pay attention to in the Adele case, or the overall feel of this band and being kind of rocked by a wall of sound is important in the REM case. And the vocals are almost like of secondary importance because that's a decision that someone made. So, long story short, if you did your job right, you can trace everything back to what was the feel supposed to be. And when I play it for a person who's never heard it, do they feel the way I want them to feel? Do they have the emotional adventure that I want them to have? So that's how I think of it.
Okay, awesome. So I mean, even more in a nutshell, I guess. It's, recording a track and releasing a song or releasing an album is a multi-step process that involves countless decisions within each step. And so, with that said, and with your really helpful description of the process out of the way, let's then talk about re-recording a
Mm-hmm.
track that already exists, right? This was a relatively common phenomenon for an artist to re-record something they'd already recorded back in the early mid 60s. I mean, maybe even sort of slightly earlier into the 50s, where an artist typically would get signed to a new label and then they'd release their previous album. They'd re-record their previous album and release it on the new label. Or, Chuck Berry famously did this, as well as a number of other artists. They recorded a greatest hits compilation of their hits from their previous label. And so they re-recorded it. And, obviously in the 60s, technology wasn't there to make it precise, such that, a listener would hear the new one and mistake it for the original, right? That there would be audible, differences, noticeable differences in tempo, in vocal styling, and guitar solos, etc. But now the technology is available such that we can pitch correct. By we, I mean people like you, pitch correct vocals or splice together a guitar solo from 50 takes, so that it sounds very close to the original. And so could you talk then about the process of what would be involved in re-recording?
Yeah, and I guess before I dive into that, I think uh, I will challenge the premise that it's it was the primitive technology that made those recordings not sound so close to each other. Because I honestly, I could see that going either way. With all the flexibility that we have, we also now have a tyranny of too many choices. So recording setups back in the day were much simpler, and in a way, it's kind of there's less to there's less variation that it was possible. Um, I think another reason now is I think a lot of artists back in the day re-recorded for business reasons of changing labels or not owning the rights to their original recordings. So likely the new recording would take place in a different studio, potentially with different backing musicians. But I think there was also just the sense that the same song would be the same words and music by the same singer, and that the tone of the recording or the backing instrumentation just wasn't considered um, as bonded to the song as it is now. Um, and if you think about a musician at that time playing 200 shows a year or something, and those shows all being different, and then those shows also possibly having different backing bands behind them, and then they get a chance to record their song. And recording back in the day was more like this filming a play, where go do your performance, and it's understood to be kind of, this is a one-off capture of something that you do differently every night anyway. And the rest of the technical process was not considered in the artist's hands at the time. In the major label, or before the kind of, in the take in the in the 50s, there was an artist with a guitar and an amp, and then there was the big bad studio with the money people in it and all this equipment that the artist had never seen. And it was walking into an alien world, and you would just do your thing and then kind of hope for the best, because it was so clearly above your pay grade to do the rest of the steps. So I think, besides just the primitiveness of the technology, it was just, artists didn't think of the final product, of controlling all these steps of the production process as part of their domain. This was something that people with big money in big buildings did. And that started to change. I'm not a historian, so I can't tell you exactly when it started to change, but like one landmark that everyone recognizes is as the Beatles went from being the four boys from Liverpool and their early albums sounding like their live performance, to late era Beatles with very involved studio projects where people talk about the studio as instrument. So the change there is artists starting to view the studio production process as part of their domain of their work product, and in many cases creating something in the studio that was not performable live at all. So therefore now part of their artistic expression lives solely in the studio. So when you get to that era, the idea of duplicating something starts to have a different meaning. What would make two songs equivalent is no longer just the words and the music, but if part of my artistic vision is also the studio production itself, then now I guess I'm on the hook to duplicate the studio production. And what does the mix sound like, and what does all the extra instrumentation sound like? So the bar for a duplicate got raised at some point. So let's say that someone came to me and said, "Hey, Michael, I have this album that I like it pretty well, but it is now I have a business issue with the label and I need to re-record it, and I want it to sound as close to this as possible. Let's go." And I have unlimited money. I would say, okay, well, the first thing I would like to know is, how much documentation do we have about how this was done? So who played on it, and where was it recorded, and what kind of space was it recorded? How many things were recorded live together versus overdubs after the fact? And even better, if you know the kinds of microphones that were used, because every microphone, there's no single best microphone, they all sound different. And any studio that is operating with a number of clients will have a large number of microphones to fit all the different occasions. They're kind of different paint brushes. Even, two singers with two different voices, they will not be served well by the same microphone. So knowing about microphones, knowing about preamps, which are the boxes the microphones get plugged into, maybe knowing about some other signature pieces of equipment that contributed to the sound, that would be helpful information. But the caveat about that is that you can know all that stuff, and you could even go to the same studio, use all the same microphones, track down the same players, plop them in front of the microphones, and you'll be very hard pressed to get the same performance out of them. It just doesn't work like that. People sing differently every day. A lot of this gear is old and temperamental, and a lot of stuff I have in my rack here, some of it needs to be warmed up, turned on and warming up for 24 hours before it will kind of stabilize and sound the way it's supposed to sound. So if I came in the next morning and redid a mix without changing anything, and I had just powered everything on, that will not sound the same. And then there's this psychological factor of um, re-recording, having the notes in mind, especially as if you're playing a solo instrument, having the notes in mind that you want to hit is a very different feeling than feeling like I'm just going to play something cool. So there's this very stilted feeling when you are trying to play the solo the same way you did 10 years ago, and it's kind of not in your fingers anymore. It's not the way you feel anymore. And then you get self-conscious and say like, wait, is this cool, or is this the way I did it? And it's just, it gets weird. For singers, you know, there are probably iconic vocal moments if you're re-recording. So the way that your voice cracks on this certain note, and it was a happy accident the first time, and now you're trying to decide, is that part of what I'm duplicating? Do I have to do that again? And it's been 10 years and your voice has changed and you've changed as a singer, and that's no longer a automatic thing that's going to spill out of your mouth. So now you have to kind of force that to happen. And so it's not really very fun to, well, if you re-record something and say my goal is to make it sound as close to the original as possible, it's kind of a chore at every step, because now your criteria is not what feels, how do I emotionally serve the song? Your criteria is not what sounds the coolest. It's just what sounds like this dead artifact from 10 years ago. And it's just not, I don't find it very fun myself. This actually comes up for me in, as I mentioned, part of the production process is early on recording a demo to just prove out your instrumentation. And then it's time to do the real thing. And often you'll find there's magic on the demo that's pretty hard to capture again. The demo is what it sounded like when no one was stressed out and everyone was just having fun and playing pretty out and wild on their solos and singing however they felt. And you hear certain things on the demo and say, man, I love that. That's so cool. I want to make sure we do that on the real one. And it tends to be very hard to do. At least hard to do authentically. You feel kind of cheesy, like you're just now you're copying something that felt good the first time, and now it's tougher. So those, I think we covered re-recording, and I would kind of assume that all the arrangements and choices of instrumentation stay the same. So the re-recording question is mostly about getting some new players or some of the old players to reproduce those parts. Playing someone else's solo is quite difficult if you're not the person who played it the first time and it's a virtuosic, notey solo. You'll just find other people's solos don't fit under your fingers very well. So it feels strange. I think it can be done, you get the result, but it doesn't, it's certainly, the whole thing just feels very different than recording the first time does. Then you get to the mix and it's a similar situation of, should I put these instruments in the same space? Should I draw attention to a voice or an instrument at this part of the song the way the original mix did? And this is the part where, as far as I can tell, no one really seems to care about the mix. So I listened to some of the re-recorded Taylor Swift songs, and what I heard her voice was older. I heard she approached some things vocally differently, which is, I think, a good choice. That's in a way that's matching the feeling instead of matching the mechanics of it. So the feeling or emotion of a song, which also might evolve after 10 years of living with it, doing things that are authentic to your current way of singing that match the feeling the song's supposed to have in your new understanding of the song, is a more authentic, satisfying way to do this than making sure that every crack and lilt is the same as it was. The instrumentation pretty much stayed the same. And then certain things about the mix, and I think this is real inside baseball, but audio engineers will notice things like what kind of reverb is being used, so exactly what the echoes sound like. That's changed a little bit, and to me it's changed to reflect modern tastes. Um, and I think they just got away with it because nobody really, your average listener doesn't listen like that, and it certainly doesn't matter if you're listening in your car on the freeway or something like that.
Yeah. So it's less than about capturing it absolutely perfectly, in which case just listen to the original. I mean, obviously there are like financial reasons maybe for Taylor Swift not to want people to listen to the originals,
Yeah.
or any other artist who's re-recording for a similar label dispute type situation, and lack of ownership of masters and so forth. But it's more about capturing the feel of it, and sort of the feel as it's evolved with you, right? Or you've evolved over time. Um, but also, yeah, sort of putting your current stamp on it to a certain extent, right? I mean, she's called them Taylor's versions. These are my versions. And so maybe there's a sense of, I'm going to improve on this slightly. And I think in interviews, she's talked about improving on her vocal performance, right? That was me as a teenager. I'm better now, so let me make this better. And I know that when Jeff Lynne did a similar sort of thing and re-recording ELO's greatest hits, and the goal there was precisely to make them better than when they produced them originally in the 70s. So do you have any thoughts about that? And maybe that's a good place to end it.
I think that that's certainly that's the that's the approach that you'd want to do as an artist, to not find the entire process just a miserable chore. Like, these albums are never, I don't I don't know that anyone has ever listened to their final product and said, this is perfect, I would change nothing. I just don't think that happens. You run out of time, you run out of energy or money or something, or you just need to be, you're sick of it and need to be done with it. But they never get to be perfect. And so to have the chance to redo it, I think most artists would jump at that. Um, at least if there's been sufficient time that they're no longer sick of it. Um, and yeah, I think that's the goal. Is if you really tried to make it identical, it's not any fun, and I don't think you're really accomplishing anything. And what's interesting is in the case of the super fan that I talked to, um, she wanted to hear the new recording, and the implication is it must be different, right? Because if it was really the same, why would she care? She would say, I have it already. This is just a legal, some legal wrangling or something. But she clearly wanted to hear the new one. And as a human, I get that, but the funny thing is, what I'm most interested is what changed.
Yeah, and so part of the fun of listening to an album that you've loved for a decade or more,
Mm-hmm.
and hearing a new version of it, and not, like a rearranged version or something, but a re-recording of duplication is spotting the differences, right? It's noticing that subtle vocal coloration, or noticing, in your case, like noticing the difference in the reverb.
Yeah.
Oh, there is a slightly different feel, and maybe it is an improvement in some sense.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. There's there's a scene in Back to the Future. I think it's at the end of Back to the Future 1, and it appears at the beginning of Back to the Future 2. But this scene was reshot because Marty's girlfriend, I think, was changed. The actor was changed between those two movies, and they had to reshoot it with the new girlfriend shot for shot. And that's an amazing side by side on YouTube to see those. Like, it is very, very, very close. Obviously, with the whole different person in it. But again, there's like some functional reason there that they wanted to do that to solve a problem. And at the end of the day, the drive, it sounds like in the Taylor Swift case and in the earlier cases you were mentioning, the incentive to do the re-recording is economic, or something else that's not exactly musical. ownership of the material. But once you're committed to doing it, the only way to make it a fun project is to find some way to make it feel fresh again. And I think in the case of the Taylor Swift stuff, saying, I know how to sing this better, I know how to live into this material better, being this much older, that at least makes it more than a chore to do it.
Yeah. So I'm not going to own it merely legally. I'm going to own it artistically, right? That, when I'm a young, struggling artist up and coming, that a lot of these decisions were out of my hand. Now they're in my hands, and I'm going to tell the producers what to do. Whereas before they may have been telling me what to do.
Yeah. And, whether that's an improvement or not depends on, I guess, your taste. See the reissues of the Star Wars movies for that.
Yeah. Going too far is going too far.
But I think it's a similar thing where George Lucas wanted to get certain things, or he continued to see them as living works and kept wanting to change things about them to suit his taste. And of course, there's debate about which one is the real one. But I think that maybe this is a good way to summarize it. I think that there's a misconception about an album that this captures the artist and this is what the artist sounds like. And I think that's a mistake, similar to looking at someone's novel and saying this is what the novelist is. It's an album is a work product, and it's something you spend a long time on, like a construction project, and then it's finished and it's essentially stale as soon as it's finished. Like you've moved on. Usually when you're finished, you say, now I know how I would really have done it, but you no longer have the money or energy to do it. So yeah, there's no fact of the matter about what the artist sounds like, and it certainly hasn't been captured in this dead piece of plastic or digital file. It's a work product, and if you get the chance to do it again, you'll probably do it a little different.
Yeah, it's like publishing in philosophy. Like I poured all this time in it. Now it's out in the world. It got published, and I wish I could redo that. I wish I could tweak that sentence. I wish I could rethink this argument. Yeah, I totally feel that. So Michael, thank you so much for joining me. This was an absolutely fantastic discussion.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.